Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the War Room, the interview series as part of the Clone Star podcast. I am your host, Joe Hurley, and joining me today, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome author Derek Attico onto our show, who has recently just completed the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko. Derek, welcome to the show.
Joe, thank you very much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Oh my God, we have the same book, Derek.
We have the same book. How did that happen? This is going to be fun.
Derek, I had to ask you straight out. I'll obviously jump into parts about DS9 later on, things like that. But how did Star Trek come into your life, specifically DS9? Did you like it from the very start, or at some point did it just come into your world?
Oh yeah. Well, I wasn't to talk about DS9. Let's talk about really quick TNG. I wasn't that fond of TNG when it first came out. It was only after...
this interview is over immediately.
I wasn't. I'll be honest, I wasn't. And it was only when I started writing my first professional short story, Alpha and Omega, for research. I started rewatching or actually watching TNG, and I was like, oh wow, it's just like TOS, which I loved. And then I really fell in love with TNG. So when DS9 premiered, I was like, okay, well, how is this going to be different from TNG? Because TNG had done some really good things. And I was floored. The first 3 minutes of DS9, it just really sets a pace and a tempo. And it says, we're Star Trek, but we are Star Trek like you've never seen before, like you've never felt before. And we're here, and we're not, this is unapologetic, but this is who we are. Wolf 359, just the pace of it, the words on the screen. In the first 3 minutes, the man loses his ship, his friends, his wife, and he's watching his ship explode. And that's the beginning. That's your intro. I was like, what's going on? So I was in love. I was in love.
I think it's one of those things that I've spoken about so many times on our show, is that Emissary is one of those episodes, I think, that when you've got more life experience, that you really appreciate it more and more. Like when I first watched it, I remember I watched it in premiere night and seeing Sisko kind of giving Picard a bit of guff, and I was thinking, who the hell does this guy think he is? But it was only years later when I returned to it, I was there going, oh, wait a second, I completely understand this, and this is actually unbelievable. And one of the things, Derek, is, do you see DS9 still as kind of being, the odd one out in the Star Trek series? And kind of even within that, do you find as well that the first 3 seasons of DS9 are kind of even the odd one out within DS9 as a whole? Because people, when they talk about DS9, they look at DS9, they very much look at the war years, which is season 4 onwards. They don't even pay attention to the first 3.
That's a really good point, Joe. I think that Deep Space Nine, that first episode, Emissary, set a particular tone. And with Mr. Avery Brooks and the creation of the character of Benjamin Sisko, with Avery Brooks playing it, we had a captain and we had a character that was just so powerful and so in your face and so present that when he went up against Picard and Patrick Stewart, was something that no one expected. It was just so from left field. We're like, where is this coming from? But I think what Deep Space Nine has done and continues to do even now, 30 years later, is it shows us the Star Trek universe, a more realistic version of the Star Trek universe. It shows us what would happen if we had the Star Trek universe. There would be people out there on the fringes of the Federation, the fringes of space, that are still trying to grapple with issues and with things. And they may not like the Federation, whereas maybe inside of the Federation, things are happy and hunky-dory. On certain planets, there are people on the outside of that and saying, hey, we're suffering out here, or we don't have it all figured out, and we might envy or not like you because you do. And so in that respect, also, I think that I know there's a story that Ira Stephen Bear tells, where I think it was in the hiatus between season 1 and 2, if I recall. He said he went to go see Avery Brooks in a performance, and I think it was a performance of it was like Othello or it was some performance that Avery Brooks was doing. I think it might have been a Paul Robeson performance, And he realized during that performance, watching him, he's like, oh, there's no problem with Avery Brooks. The problem is with our writing.
Yeah.
We need to bring our writing up to this actor. And after that, you start to see a change, not just in Sisko's words and writing, but in the ideas and ideals for Deep Space Nine, because by season 2, they had started to implement ideas about the changelings and the founders and all that. So he's almost like a fulcrum or sea change starts to happen. And I think a large part, those writers will say, because of that event, they start to shift things, and it became a show with a lot more gravitas, I think, than it had, or maybe than it was planned to have in season 1, if that's something I could say.
And was the character of Ben Sisko somebody that you immediately kind of associated with? Like, is he someone that you were immediately interested in?
I was definitely immediately interested in him. First of all, I knew of Avery Brooks, Mr. Avery Brooks, from his time on Spencer for Hire. Right. And
Man Named Hawk. Yeah.
Right, Man Named Hawk. What was interesting to me, and I also knew of his work, he has an affection for the actor and singer Paul Robeson. And so I knew of these things, but what was so fascinating was that when he was in his portrayal of Benjamin Sisko, it was like nothing he had done before. So he was bringing something totally, completely different to Benjamin Sisko, which is like, wow, because Avery Brooks is always this person with this presence, and in Benjamin Sisko, he still has that presence, but a lot of it is tempered. A lot of it is contained, and it's like, wow, that's very interesting. And then, of course, he was a Black man on television in 1993 in a time when there wasn't really a Black male lead in drama on television. You had Bill Cosby and the Huxtables, which was a great show, but that's pretty much a comedy.
Yep.
You didn't really have any drama. I think maybe Homicide, Life on the Street, but that's crime. You didn't really have anything that was uplifting, science fiction that was pushing us forward. And Deep Space Nine was the only thing, and Star Trek was the only thing representing that through Avery Brooks and Benjamin Sisko.
I think as well. Yeah, I was just thinking there, I can't remember where it was. It could have been in the documentary We Left Behind, but it wasn't just the fact that, the Black character leading the show, he was also a single father as well. And I was thinking at the time, I can't remember what I saw, but they were talking about like all these lists of kind of, great father figures on TV. And Avery Brooks, Ben Sisko, is never part of that conversation because his relationship with Jake is brilliant from the very start to the end.
It really is, and it's always overlooked in television. And it's interesting that for the Huxtables, that's a great father-son relationship as well. But for me, I know watching those two at the time, I enjoyed watching the Cosby Show. Of course, it was a cool show, but I took Deep Space Nine more seriously just because it was a drama. Yeah. And because it was science fiction, something I was identified with, but the stakes were different. It wasn't a laugh at, and we wrap everything up at the end of, 30 minutes or an hour. He was a man that was started out on the show as a widow, trying to raise his son, didn't always know what he was doing, but was trying, and acknowledge that to people around him, acknowledge that to his son. And to me, that just felt innately more realistic and organic than anything I was seeing on television at the time.
And I think what's great is as his relationship with Jake develops, because like obviously, the character Jake is growing up as well. It's how he interacts in those certain kind of scenes where he doesn't know kind of what to do. Like when Jake is dating a Davo girl, when Jake is friends with Nog and things like that. And it's just how they play it is so kind of good in terms of, he has to learn to accept his son for the decisions that he's making. And what's great about the character then as well, obviously, is the fact that he's big enough to admit kind of when he's wrong, because in the scene where, say, Jake brings the Davo girl over for dinner and they have a conversation and she completely schools him, and he accepts it, and he doesn't get, he's kind of big enough to say, you know what, I got this wrong and I'm actually fine with that. It's a great lesson there, again, to kind of, as you were saying, it's set in the 24th century, but it's a human lesson to kind of learn, like, don't judge a book by its cover.
Yes, yes, that's exactly right. Another moment that really comes to mind is when Nog comes to Ben Sisko and wants him to mentor him, and Ben already has this almost innate prejudice towards Ferengi.
Yeah.
And he doesn't even realize that he has it, but he has it. And most people in Starfleet have it. And then he realizes, he says, once he and Nog have that conversation, he realizes that that's something that he has to confront within himself and put that away and mentor Nog. So he is learning through these young people, and it's this older or this adult learning through young people. And it also, what I really loved about Deep Space Nine is that we had moments of young people trying to find their way.
Yeah.
Making mistakes. And we saw them grow up as they didn't always make the right decisions, but they were trying. And I thought that was very interesting and very real and very honest to show those things. So to show the missteps many times from Nog, from Jake on that show. It was really, really, really inspiring stuff.
And how long have you had the idea to do this book?
Oh, well, I wanted to do it way before I got the project landed, before I was given the permission to do it. I mean, when they did the Titan books, has done some beautiful work with the autobiography series. And so they did Kirk, they did Spock, they did Picard, and then they skipped over Benjamin Sisko and they did Janeway.
Janeway.
Right. And I was expecting, I think many of us was expecting them to do a Benjamin Sisko one, but they skipped it and they did Janeway. And I was like, oh, wow. If Titan Books ever does Benjamin Sisko, man, that would be great if I could get it. Oh, that'll never happen. But if it did, how would I do it? And so right then I started thinking about how I would do it. But I mean, that's not ever going to happen. and then somebody does a podcast talking about how the Ben Sisko autobiography is skipped. And some person on Twitter is like, hey, I read Attico's 2016 Strange New World story, The Dream of the Dream, about Benny Russell. He'd be a great fit for Benjamin Sisko autobiography.
I remember that tweet. I remember that, yeah.
That got into Titan Books. They saw that. They went and read the short story, Dream of the Dream. Yeah. And they were like, oh, yeah, he'd be a good fit. And then they reached out to me.
Now, when they reached out to you, were you kind of there going, this is crazy. There's no way I can write a bloody book about this man in his voice? Or did you say, no, I'm 100% going to do this. I have my doubts, but I can deal with them and I can do this.
Well, I'll answer that with a paraphrase. I love film, right? So there's a line in Ghostbusters, the original Ghostbusters. If anyone ever asks you if you're a god, you say yes. and kids, if you don't know, go see the film or go watch the film. You understand the joke in that. But I mean, I'm gonna say no. I mean, of course. And I had been thinking about it for a while. And George Sanderson reached out to me and he's like, there's a project I'd like to talk to you about. And I was like, project? And he's like, yeah, we read that short story and we'd like to have a discussion with you about the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko. How would you do it? And so I told him my idea. I said, well, I figured I don't have the project. So there's no harm, there's no foul, there's nothing lost in just saying what I would like to do. And I said, it has to be a story of a father to a son. It has to be.
Yeah.
Before anything, even before it's an autobiography, it just has to be a father talking to his son. That's the core of, in many ways, Deep Space Nine, the core of it is family.
Yeah. And
at the core of that family has always been Ben and Jake. And then other family, other than there's of course there's Rom, Nog, Quark, all the other families, the O'Briens, all the other families, but at the core of it is the Siskos. And I said, so it has to start there. And I was like, well, Ben is in the wormhole. I was like, well, I have a way to get around that. Much like the Greek gods have have talked to man in mythology. I can work around that. And he's like, oh, I
Yeah.
like that idea. I like that idea. And we were off to the races.
So when you started doing it, look, the obvious question that I'd say you're being asked a million times, did you talk to Avery Brooks?
Everybody, well, a lot of people ask that. That's not the most asked question. The most asked question is, will Mr. Avery Brooks do the audio book? And the answer to that question is, I don't know. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe if the book does well, maybe he will be approached to do it. Did I speak to him? No, I did not. Would I have loved to? Of course, I would have loved to. But honestly, if I had had the option, I don't even know if I would have taken it, because that would have been very intimidating. I've spoken to him. I've met him 3 times. I've spoken to him once. The man has an energy and a presence that is palpable. Believe me, when I say it's palpable, it's like, wow. So I've actually shaken his hand once, and that's something I will never forget. So I don't even know if I would have taken.
It's probably one of those things, Derek, isn't it? Is that when you met him, it was probably a case of, what do I ask him that stands out that nobody else has ever asked him before? And it's not going to be some stupid question that he's going to say, I've answered that a million times. Why are you asking me that? And trying to say something profound to him that stands out.
But yeah, I was actually with my mentor at the time, and mentor in film. And we were going into a restaurant in Harlem, and he was coming out. And really quick, I just thanked him for all his work. And I asked him, what was it like to direct Far Beyond the Stars? And he shook his hand, and he just looked at me and said, necessary.
And yes, that's exactly what you'd expect him to say, really.
And walked off. And that was it. And it was like this presence, and I was swooning, literally swooning. So I, with that in mind, I don't know if I would have wanted to have talked to him about the book, because it would have just been so intimidating, to be quite honest, to really be honest. And there were times that when I first started writing this, I started thinking about the weight of what I was writing. And I was like, I just have to put all that out of my head and just focus on them writing a project and getting it done. Because if you think too much about things, and writers are always in their heads, then you can mess it up, So I was like, I didn't want to do that. So yeah.
So who did you speak to then in kind of preparation for this? Or did you kind of just by and large just kind of go on your own?
Yeah, no, it's all me. It's me. The only person that I really spoke to and talked things out with was George Sanderson, the managing editor at Titan. And I told him a lot of my ideas for the book, things that I wanted to happen in Ben's life, things that I thought would be instrumental and pivotal for the character. Because Ben Sisko is such a balanced character, unlike any captain that we've seen. He has trauma, but he's balanced. He has the work-life balance pretty much figured out. He's not micromanaging his people. So the trick with Ben Sisko is to figure out how he got there.
Yeah.
Where did all that balance come from? And it had to come from places in his family and in his childhood. So I had to build that. And so George and I talked about that. And then I had to write an outline. And then that outline had to be approved by Titan and by CBS. So it took about a week to write that outline.
2 questions then straight away that from coming from social media kind of correspond to this part in your story. One is from our good friend Chris Trecken. How much freedom did you have in writing the book from the execs? Was there anything they kind of said you have to do, or things that said you can't do?
Well, Chris, that's a great question for Chris. And thank you, Chris, for that question. No. This is also, I should mention, my first novel, which people may find a little weird or wild. But this is also my first novel. And so I'm very thankful to have done this with Titan, because they were really hands off. It was like, well, an outline has to be to us by this date, manuscript by this date, and so it was pretty much what I wanted to do. I think in all honesty, and this is just my impression, I don't know, but I've been writing Star Trek on and off since 2005 professionally. They read the 2016 story Dreamer in a Dream, so they knew I had a certain level of understanding
Yeah.
and capability with Star Trek, and I know Star Trek backwards and forward at this point. There's nothing I don't know about Star Trek. So I think that was never a question. It was just a matter of what I was going to put in. And I think they would probably ask questions like after the outline was written. But once I gave them the outline, they read it and they didn't even have any problems with it. They were like, okay, this is cool.
And Tracker 57, who I call Matt Tracker because I was a big fan of Mask back in the old days. I'm exposing my age there as being a 1982 child. What challenges, if any, did you come across writing the book?
Oh my God. Trekker 57?
Tracker, yeah.
Trekker, yeah. Yeah, a lot of challenges. Creating the origin story of Benjamin Sisko. Creating the people in his life. One of the biggest challenges was the fact that on the show, he mentions that he has two brothers, and it's like one line in the second season. And I was like, and we don't see them for the whole 7 years. And I'm like, so what am I going to do for that? And then 7th season, he mentions that he has a sister, Judith, like in 2 different episodes. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do for, because why have we not seen these people at all or mentioned? And so then I realized, well, the easy way to have gone would have been like to give them like, they're dead or some kind of trauma. But I said, no, I think the more organic thing to do would just to create well-rounded, full human beings. And therefore they become really interesting characters with their own lives. And with siblings, you don't always hear from your siblings because they're too busy doing their own stuff,
One of the things, actually, sorry to cut across, one of the things I found really kind of brilliant about the book when I was reading it is, as I read it, I was very conscious of the fact that I was there going, this very much sounds like Benjamin Sisko's voice that I'm reading. Like, it read like this was written by him. It didn't feel like it was someone else writing for him. How did you strike that balance? Did you just kind of feel that you were so in tune with the character yourself? And then kind of along with that, how much of you is in that character? Or is it none of you, all Benjamin Sisko?
Wow, that's a great question, Shel. Briefly, I got a rhythm for him in the 2016 Dreamer in a Dream. But then to come back around to that in 2022 was interesting. I watched In the Pale Moonlight, I think about 3 or 4 times back to back one day, because that episode is basically almost like a play, and it's just him in a narrative piece of Benjamin Sisko or Mr. Avery Brooks just speaking to the camera, and just to get his voice. And one of the first things I realized about this book is that the book can't start out with the voice. It's a little tricky to explain. It can't start out overall with the voice of Benjamin Sisko, because we never start out with who we are now, as adults. That voice evolves from children up. So not only did I have to kind of really get the voice of Benjamin Sisko as an adult, but I had to kind of get there. So I had to create an arc so that by him as a kid and him as a teenager. And so then by the time I get to him as an adult, you should almost start to hear and see the Ben Sisko, if that makes sense, And that was a little tricky because I was like, well, how am I going to do that? And so I just started writing him as a kid. And I was like, okay, I've got the kid, and then I started writing the teen. I was like, okay, I've got the teenager, and then I just started to blend all three. And in regards to how much of me is in this book, a fair amount, I think. Some life experiences of mine I've given to Ben, only because I think they inform the character. Yeah. And if something can inform a character in your own life, I think it becomes more authentic for that character.
And you actually preempted one of my questions here, Derek, actually, because you've said you watched In the Pale Moonlight back to back a few times. We put this up on Twitter a couple of weeks ago and we had a poll on it. So I'm going to ask you, and not only you have to answer yes or no, but you have to justify this is like high school debating. Was Sisko right in The Pale Moonlight in the decision he made?
Hell yes. Hell yeah. Well, I mean, he wasn't the only culprit, though, was he? I mean, this is a two-part question. I recently, actually just a few days ago, I finished listening to A Stitch in Time.
So did I, yeah.
Oh my God. And in many ways, I think A Stitch in Time and the Autobiography of Benjamin Sisko are like bookends to Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
Where they're talking like at or to each other from different ends, So, I mean, he had a culprit. He had help. But I mean, I don't see the other options. The other options were they would be speaking whatever the Dominion dialect would be, because it was getting kind of grim. So it was the two people to put in charge of a plan like that was Sisko and Garrick. No two other people I think could have carried off that plan in that way.
I remember when the episode was first on all those years ago, and I remember watching it, and like in the way the Next Generation would always, and the original series would tie everything up properly. When they were going through this, I remember thinking, they're not going to do what I think they're going to do. I was there going, it's clearly the right decision. But then I started thinking, wait a second, this is DS9. DS9 will do this. And I was there going, do they have the courage to kind of go through with it? And they did. And I was there going, this is brilliant. And I was there going, and it's only Sisko that could have pulled it off.
Right. And it's only Sisko that could have pulled it off. And I will say in the autobiography, that is touched on or addressed, but perhaps not in the way readers may be expecting.
Yes, absolutely. You're dead right. Now, there's one question I had. On the back of the book, you have a specific quote, right? And I'm going to read it out because it's a brilliant quote. It is the unknown that defines our existence. We are constantly searching, not just for answers to our questions, but for new questions. We are explorers. There's a lot of Benjamin Sisko quotes that you could have picked. Why did you pick that one?
Well, I will be honest. Two things. That beautiful quote, is from the pilot episode Emissary, with Ben talking to the prophets, to the wormhole aliens, trying to express to them what humanity is. And that quote, I will give credit where credit is due, because we discussed what quotes to give. That quote was offered up by Mr. George Sanderson, the editor.
Yeah. And
when he and George does not know this, but when he offered that quote, I was like, damn, that's really good. I don't have anything better than that. That's a good quote, George. I don't have anything better than that. That's the quote. That's the quote. That's the quote. That's the quote.
So hang on. What was your original idea to put there?
I don't remember. What was my original idea? It was obviously another quote, but I think I was thinking, I can't remember exactly, but I think I was thinking something that Ben says in that same speech, but a little bit earlier. And George was like, "This is the actual quote," and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's it. That's it." I really don't remember, because this is a long time ago now. If it comes to me, I'll say it, but I don't remember. But I know his was the better one. His was the better one. And a long time ago, George and I had one of our first actual conversation was that we would be always an agreement we made is that we would always be true to the story.
Yeah.
And he was definitely right on that. So
I'm interested, like going through the book, there's a few kind of points I wanted to kind of ask you about. One is you make clear in the book that the events of the episode, The Visitor, were never divulged. Why did you decide that he wouldn't have told Jake?
That's a great question.
Because if you look at
Yeah.
the end of All Good Things, Picard does tell them all what happens 25 years into the future. Why do you think Cisco held back and said, I'm not going to tell Jake what happens here?
See, you're really good, Joe, because I thought about that. And I was thought, well, would he tell his kid? I mean, at the time, that was I think that
4.
was season 4.
Yeah.
So, Jake wasn't that old then. He was Jake has always been a little naive, even though he was, growing. He was at that age, about what, 16, 17,
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know if he would have told him, oh, you become this man that becomes bitter, that just can't let go. And these are themes and things. Do you want to tell a 16-year-old these kind of things? And, and there was a lot of pain in that episode that Jake held on to. And I didn't know if a father would want to express that to his 16-year-old kid,
Yeah.
Now, if Jake was older, I'm sure he would have told him.
Yeah.
Like if Jake was 20, 21, he'd have been like, hey, look, man, this is what you do. And you're going to have to let go, which is why in the autobiography, he says, look, this is what happened. And I don't want a repeat of this.
Yeah.
Because I can see it happening because it happened then. And I can see you, going to do that now. And so that is what is in a lot of ways is part of the framing device of why Ben starts talking to Jake the way he does for the book.
Like going through the book, especially Sisko's early life and things like that. And obviously a lot of the inspirations that he has, especially coming from his family and things like that, probably were inspirations for yourself. So you mentioned the jazz musician, Oscar Peterson, at one point in the book, and you said that he had a lot to get out. And when I read that, I was there going, is Derek talking about himself here? Did he have a lot to get out? And is that why he's put him inside here?
Wow, that's interesting. In that case, I've always loved jazz. CJM Blues, I love that piece. And I was going to use that piece, but I didn't know a lot about Oscar Peterson until I started just drilling down. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, Oscar Peterson is great for the story because he started at 5. And at the time in the book, Ben is like 6. So that's perfect. And in regards to getting out, there's a lot of things that I've always wanted to get out or had to get out. And I've done it through writing. But I think it doesn't matter what medium you use. I think we all have things and emotions that we have to get out, and we find different ways to articulate that, find different ways to get it out. For a lot of people, it's through music. For me, it's been through writing. Some people it's through art. There are a myriad of different ways. And so for Ben, I knew it was going to be music, but I'm still talking about a lot of the same things,
Yeah.
And if I'm a writer, with any with any skill, I should be able to articulate things for this character, whether I've lived them or not.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So there was a certain point when I was writing a young Ben Sisko, and it was just all it was just coming to me as easily as I was writing for someone that was an actual flesh and blood person.
Was that a car horn I heard beeping in the background there, Derek?
Yeah. It's New York.
The Bronx, after all.
It's the Bronx. It's New York and the Bronx. Can't.
Okay, in the book, there is something I had to specifically ask you. Pizza. How much do you love pizza?
Oh, I love pizza. Let's just get this. Obviously, too much. Have you seen me? I love pizza. I love pizza. And I'll tell you something about that scene. I was writing that scene, man. I was writing that scene. This is the honest truth. I was writing that scene at like 2:30 in the morning. I was really hungry. And it's not good to eat at 2 in the morning, but writers, right? And I was like, no, I'm not going to eat because, it's the last thing you want to do. I'm like, And I was like, you know what? Pizza and baseball. Yeah, I'm just going to go nuts with this scene. And I read it and I'm like, well, that's pretty funny. And I read it and I'm like, okay, but I was tired. had been like, it was one of those days that I had literally been writing the whole day. And it was like almost 3 in the morning. I was like, I gotta get to sleep. I gotta be up. Because from my schedule, I was like getting up around 6:30 every morning. And so it was already like 2:30 in the morning, So I was like, I gotta go to sleep. But I was like, let me write this one last scene. So I wrote it. I thought it was pretty funny. I went to sleep. I woke up around 6:30 in the morning. I read it again. I'm like, this is a little nuts, but it's funny. And we kept it as is, and I just thought like Ralph and the whole scene, I just really enjoyed writing Ralph.
So my question I went along with that is, where is the best place to get pizza?
Oh, well, I believe it's New York City. I don't think there's any place better than New York City.
But which place in New York City is your favorite? Yes, there you go.
I will tell you, there is this place, Tony's Pizza, I believe was the name of it, is I used to go to John Jay College of Criminal Justice. I went there to finish my degree. And it was like this hole in the wall right across the street from John Jay College of Criminal Justice. So that would make it like 58th Street and 10th Avenue. And they've been there forever. And it's a little hole in the wall, but they've been there forever because they have the best pizza. And I have tasted pizza, and it's the best I've tasted in Manhattan. In the Bronx, there's a really good place on Allerton Avenue, but I can't remember the name of it right now. But it's usually hole in the wall, especially in New York City. It's usually like the big places is usually, but the hole in the wall mom and pops are still the places to find really good pizza, because to exist, they have to have really good pizza. To still be around, they have to have really good pizza. So those are two of the best places that I've known. And I know,
Derek, I have to ask you this obvious question as well. Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
What kind?
Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
No. Gosh.
Anyway, this interview is over. We thank her.
I've never done it. So to be honest, I've never done it. Maybe one day. I know. Maybe one day I'll do it. Maybe if we meet in person one day.
Yes, yeah, we'll do that.
Okay. Exactly. All right. I will wait for that. Okay. But
Derek, what's your writing style then? Like when you're writing, do you listen to music? Do you write in silence? What is the way that you effectively write?
Usually it's music. Sometimes I just need to tune out everything and I'll write in silence. For a lot of this book, I started trying to listen to like Star Trek music, and that didn't work for me for this, which is really interesting. Because I usually love something from Star Trek if I'm writing something about Star Trek. Interestingly enough, I found I listened to a lot of Marvel's Black Panther 1 and 2, and those themes and that music, African beats, international music, a lot of that really got me going. For some reason, that music, I think because that music is just seems to be very in tune with the character, and I knew that a lot of what Benjamin Sisko represented was Afrofuturism and all that, and it just kind of helped propel me. And then there were days that I just would listen to nothing and would just write. Just
one of the things as well is you talk when Ben is making the decision to leave Earth and he's going to go to Starfleet and all that, and his dad brings him to the museum that teaches about kind of Black history and things like that. How important kind of was it for you to kind of bring that to the book in terms of he has no knowledge of this? And like, obviously we're talking about something that would happen, say in the 1950s. We're talking about the 23, whatever, 40s, 50s kind of thing like that. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's important kind of like in the way that, say, society, culture currently is, that there's a kind of bit of an attempt to kind of, airbrush a lot of the history and all that? How important is it for you to kind of say in the 24th century, we should never forget what's kind of, what has happened and how it informs us going forward?
I think it is essential because the only way to, well, first of all, Gene Roddenberry, I thought a lot about Gene Roddenberry. And in creation of the original series, Gene Roddenberry says in the original series that World War III happens and that we mess up. We mess up really bad. A lot of people get, billions of people die. And then after that, we realize we've done so badly that we start to turn a corner. And then Zephyr Cochrane creates the warp drive, and then the Vulcans come, and we start to like really unite. And so I thought about that, and I said, well, the only way that, at least in my opinion, for that to happen, is you have to remember what has come before. You can't. There's a saying. I'd rather hear an uncomfortable truth than a beautiful lie. And I think if you start to just erase things that are uncomfortable, you are destined to repeat them. But if you keep those uncomfortable, ugly, and yet honest, factual points in history alive and remember them, then you can say, you know what? We did these things. These things were horrendous, and we did them to other human beings. Let's not do them anymore. Let's move past those things. And so then, once I had thought all that out of my head, I said, okay, so in the Star Trek universe, they should have remembrance centers all around the globe, so that if Earth is this utopia, it just can't be presto magical utopia. It has to have these remembrance centers where people of every generation can still go and still watch these events, and that these events can weigh on people so that they can know not to do these things. And that way, those things stay with us, but they're not a part of us. We're moving past them. We're remembering them. And that's why in the book, he has, there's a racism and remembrance wing. There's a war and remembrance wing, so I figured there would be different wings, but they would always be punctuated with remembrance. Remember, so that you don't forget, this is who we were. Let's not be that in the future.
And like you do see in the episode of DS9 with Vic Fontaine, where Sisko does talk about, like, at this point in actual human history, this is actually what was going on. Like, and then your book kind of informs where he kind of learned that from. And it's interesting what you said there about, the way that we talk about Starfleet being a utopia. And you saw it small bits in the original series, in the movies, in The Next Generation, but you see it a lot more in DS9 in terms of the people who betrayed Sisko. And it's funny because it was only when I was reading the book, as I was finishing it last night, and I was reading through one part of the book, and I was there going, oh, wow, he's actually been betrayed by quite a lot of people. And you've got Cal Hudson, you've got Michael Eddington, you've got Admiral Layton, and you've got Cassidy Yates. And I was there going, oh, my God, he put his faith in the wrong people so much, didn't he? Like, and it kind of showed that there is this kind of very, sinister edge to it. And like, when he talks about Cal Hudson specifically, and he's kind of talking about, maybe I could have gone down that road. And again, it kind of, as you were kind of saying about how fleshed out the character has been over the years, not just in relation to his relationship with his son, with his wife, who kind of from the Mirror Universe and all that kind of thing. It's his relationship with people who would be his friends, his mentors, his, now wife and all that kind of thing, that he has had such a kind of a struggle to kind of keep on going.
Absolutely. I tried to show parallels in the book, parallels of relationships, parallels of life experiences. And I think even Ben mentions, that he had the prophets to kind of like break him out of where he was, out of his grief. And that Cal never had that. Cal never got that. And that, if he hadn't had that experience with the prophets, he probably would have gone the same route as Cal, and because we all experience things, sometimes similarly, but sometimes differently. And so I'm just trying to show a lot of those parallels with characters, and at the same time, give Cal Hudson kind of round him out for the reader as well, and kind of finish that story,
And in terms of guest stars, especially guest stars as Starfleet officers, did anyone ever fill a Starfleet uniform out better than Bernie Casey did in the Maquis? He just looks magnificent in the uniform. He looks phenomenal in the uniform.
He
He
does.
walks into Sisko's office. You're going, my God, that man looks glorious in that uniform. It's like they poured him straight into it. He looks phenomenal. In terms of, say, as the book goes by, there's a lot of references to Star Trek characters. But we've got Dr. Pulaski. We've got a reference to Captain Uhura. We've got Spock getting his hair cut in the barbers, which I thought was absolutely because they're going, the man has to get his hair cut somewhere.
Sometime, right?
We've also got the reference to Geordi. We've got the reference to Data. Now, I was really interested about the one with Data. Why did you put him on the ship?
I wanted to write Data. I love Data's character, but this was also a really great moment because I realized a lot in books and a lot in episodes. Specifically episodes, whenever someone meets Data, they're just so amazed that he's an android, And I imagine that must be a little weary for Data, right? And
like someone mispronouncing someone's name wrong for 40 years.
Right. Like when someone mispronounces your name. And so I really like tackling things from different directions,
Yeah.
And so when Data, when Ben doesn't take that route with Data, it surprises Data.
Yeah,
he's like, oh, wait a minute, and it also makes a commentary about stereotypes, and the stereotypes that we make and the presumptions we make about people. So I thought it was a great moment to put in.
And in terms of, say, like Trailer Scott, though, I did not see that coming, right? But it plays into the brilliant theme of the fact that he's been in love a few times and it's ended. But what I like is they end for kind of reason that he has to put a bit of thought into in terms of saying, is it right to end this? And it's this very mature approach he has to how the relationships grow, develop, and then how they end as well. And I thought that was, again, that's kind of where it really kind of the voice of Sisko came true in terms of this is exactly how he would actually approach the situation.
Yeah. And by the time we get to Deep Space Nine and Emissary, Ben Sisko is surrounded by women, Kira, Cassidy, the Kai, there are a lot of women on Deep Space Nine. And so I wanted him to be familiar and just be comfortable around women and strong women.
Strong women, 100%.
Women specifically. And I've always wanted to write a Trailer Scott story. I just thought that it was a character, it was a beautiful character. And I just never really liked the way that the character went out. So I was like, well, this was an opportunity. And I think it not only is an opportunity, but it makes sense to put her with Ben. It really worked. When I was thinking about it, but as I wrote it, I was like, oh yeah, this really works between the two of them. And then it gave parallels. It fit her story and her arc. It fit, and it really fit for Ben and what was going on in his life before her and after her.
In terms of, say, towards the end of the book, there was something I saw, and I was convinced I was looking at. I turned the page, and I was there going, "What the hell?" I said something's not right in this book here, and you know exactly what it is. And I was there going, "Wait a second, how the hell did he redact something in his own book?" And I was there going, "This is really weird." So I'm not going to ask you what was there because there's a reason you've redacted it. However, I have to ask you: did you write something specifically for you did?
Yes.
And you reject, but you're going to keep that to yourself, correct?
Yeah, yes. And Jake. I mean, if Sirach Lofton asked me what it was, I'll tell him. But I mean, and my editor knows, and that's it. The three of us, that's it. Yeah.
So you'll tell me after the podcast, right?
Nope.
Nope. The whole reason for this interview is for me to find that out. It's only an hour into the interview. That's all you tell me. There's a lot of growth in this book, like, in terms of, say, Sisko, in terms of, say, even like not just him, but the growth of his entire family, like his mother, his father, his brothers, his sister. One of the things I was conscious of is that DS9 went off the air, like over 23 years ago now. So if we were to treat that in real time, we can say that Sisko has been gone for 23 years. What growth do you think he's kind of undergoing right now as he's with the prophets?
Wow, that's a heavy question. Wow.
You
Well,
didn't come on here for the easy questions, Derek. I
I
warned
did
you this would be
not.
tough.
That is a great question. Nobody's even asked anything like that. I would hope uh, that Ben has learned things he didn't know about himself, but also about time and the cosmos. Uh, wow. Yeah, I mean, because it's non-linear. So for him, I don't even know if he'll be aware of
Passage of time.
the passage of time, because the way I wrote it, he sends that message to Jake, and I don't think this is really that much of a spoiler. He sends that message to Jake as soon as he gets
Enters,
there,
yeah.
enters but it doesn't get to Jake until like a year later, because he's not fully understanding what of his own ability, so that's a really interesting question. How long would it take to become a master of nonlinear time and space in the cosmos? Would it take 23 years, 23 minutes? Would it, that's a great question.
You have to think about that and come back on and tell us your further thoughts on it at some point, Derek. And where do you think Jake is now?
Oh, that's a little bit easier. I think if you use this book as a continuation, then I would hope that Jake took the messages in this book to heart, because that's what his father would have wanted, and that he went and lived his life, and has lived his life, because his father's there with him. His father's there with him in those words. And I'm sure Jake, being Jake, would speak truth to power, and been in some really cool adventures. Maybe one day, if anyone's listening from Star Trek, I would love to write some of those adventures or be a part of some of those adventures. Guys, I have ideas. But yeah, I think that's that would be a great place to take Jake, as a person that speaks truth to power, because we always see things from the Federation point of view, and we automatically presume it's the right point of view, it's the right idea. But it would be nice to have someone like Jake, who's like still on the outside, saying, hey, I don't know if we should do that. I don't know if we should do this thing. And him being a reporter would be really, really cool. Like a Bob Woodward kind of person.
And just kind of pulling it back one question again, in terms of, say, what with Sisko being with prophets, obviously, non-linear time and things like that, like, what do you think is the actual point in him being there? Like, what is it that they're trying to teach him, or what's he trying to learn from them? What do you think is the overall point of him being there? Because obviously he hasn't returned, so there has to be a reason that he's not back. What do you think is the overall point of him being there?
Well, I will say I did think about that, and I will say that I not only did I write this sort of biography, but there are what you could call like non-linear moments in the autobiography. And I kind of asked that question as well in those non-linear moments.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's a lot of what we all think. I don't think that a lot of what the prophets say can be determined and dissected in a lot of different ways. So I'm from what I believe, I don't know who is the emissary. Is it Ben? Is it Jake? Because a parent is the emissary of their child, right?
Yep.
And if everything is non-linear to the prophets, then they could just be looking to wanting Jake, but Ben could be the process to do that.
Yeah.
So there are options, and anyone that wants to use this for anything in Star Trek, there are ways to do that from what I've written,
Just in terms of then, say, like, when the Next Generation would have started, the obvious concern is at what point is the original people brought back in and things like that. We had a cameo appearance from DeForest Kelly in the pilot and all this kind of thing. like the main two characters obviously were Kirk and Spock. With Spock, you had
Mhm.
this easy story of reunification, made total sense. With the character of Shatner's Kirk, I always felt personally it was going to be impossible to bring him back because, like, what story of what magnitude could bring him back? Now, my question is, if you were to bring Cisco back, like, would it be like as an appearance in, say, Lower Decks, because that's the current show the 24th century, or well, 25th century as we kind of moved into now? Would it be a movie? Would it be in a show like Picard or something like that? And the problem is then is like, do you bring him back to keep him back and just put him back to a day job of filling in progress reports? Like, what story can bring him back in what way?
I know they brought him back in the novels. I know he's back in the IDW comics.
Yeah.
If I was to bring him back, I would do something very different. Just because I have thought about it, and again, I would do it from a different perspective, and I would be thinking more non-linear and more from the prophet's point of view. You know, we are always thinking about it of we want Sisko back. We want to see things, and I don't know. And also, I don't know if Mr. Avery Brooks would want to come back. But if it was me, I'd probably bring him back for like one scene.
Yeah.
Honestly, and it would be a very powerful scene.
Yeah.
And then that scene would be the jumping off point for a lot of stuff that I got in my head, because you could bring the Cisco back, and then that could be the starting off point for so many things.
Just in terms of, say, the relationship as well between Ben and Jake, how important do you think that was throughout the entire show? And even I think going forward, like, it's still something to be discussed, because at some point something will happen. And I suppose,
right.
How do you think that, like, how important was it, first of all, throughout the series, but two, if it ever happens or brought back, how do you think the relationship will be at that point?
That is what's beautiful, because as a writer, and let's say it is like 23 years or 30 years or whatever, and Jake is now a grown man, right? And let's say he has kids or whatever. I mean, now it's a whole beautiful thing of rediscovering your parent after not seeing them for so long. And I mean, there's such rich, fertile soil of material for that, because and even if you were to use like elements of this book as canon, you could just go crazy, because there's just so much to do.
What did you feel in terms of, say, the importance of Benny Russell was in DS9?
Oh wow! Well, I mean, it was just it's a phenomenal episode. It was a pivotal episode for Star Trek, for Deep Space Nine. The telling of the story of a Black writer in 1950s that can't get his stuff published, not because he's not any good. He's a good writer, but simply because of the color of his skin, he can't get anything published, is a very honest story. It has happened still in many ways. It's not something that just happened in the 1950s. It's something that is still, to some degree, happened. I mean, we look at Octavia Butler and a lot of that. We look to her. So the fact that Star Trek took that on and dealt with it honestly and candidly and in our face, and yet entertained us in a mind-blowing way is everything. Then on top of that, having the idea that it is Benny Russell writing all of Star Trek, coming up with the idea of all of Star Trek, is a very powerful notion. And I don't think it diminishes in any way the ideas and morals of Mr. Gene Roddenberry, not in any way, because he is the one that his origins allowed for all that, so he's the one planting and creating that fertile soil so that a Benny Russell can grow in that soil, and the idea of a Benny Russell. So it's a very powerful thing. So it's just an incredible piece of American television. I think it's one of the top 5 still today.
It's funny, you mentioned in the book about, and again, this is the 1359 question I kind of have for you, is that we spoke a long time ago on the podcast about the fact that there's probably a lot of Wolf 359 support groups out there that, Ben Sisko is a part of. And I'm often thinking of the fact that the Battle of Wolf 359 would have probably taken place in the calendar, like the start of the year, around like January 1st or January 2nd kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm often wondering, like, if the Enterprise was ever at like a starbase, like around that time, like, could you imagine Captain Picard walking into a room and it's like Wolf 359 supporters group, and here's Captain Picard? But Jesus, sorry lads, listen, I shouldn't be here. That's all kind of thing. How important was it for you to kind of bring in the fact? Because like, it's not like I like the fact that Ben Sisko just comes straight out and says, like, a lot of us were shocked by the fact that basically Picard was cleared for command again and put back in charge after all that he did. And again, that kind of leads into his attitude towards him when he first kind of meets him in Emissary, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think when forgiveness is hard when you're hurting. It's a very human emotion, And when you're hurt and your pain and your grief and your sorrow when you're living with it and it's so present and it's bearing down on top of you, and then you're asked at the same time, concurrently, well, have forgiveness for this individual, for what they went through. I think the human thing is to not hear that, to not comprehend that. It's like I have to there's a line in Star Trek V where Kirk says, I need my pain. And when I was a kid, I really didn't understand that. But as I got older, I was like, oh yeah, I get that. He needs that pain, And he may not want it, but he needs it. And I think that's where Ben was talking about. He's like, I didn't want to hear that. That's not something I wanted to hear, that this man was now all is forgiven. And, he's put back on the flagship and we're good. And the human thing is that there were people that did not want that.
Yeah.
And yet it happened. And I felt it would only add to the flavor and texture of the story to address that.
If you were to say, like, you've written this book and you've obviously looked at the character so closely and things like that, if you were to go back DS9, season 1, episode 1, would you change how the 7 years kind of worked, especially the first 3 years, with the way the series ends up going down the road of him being the emissary, the connection with the prophets, the power rates and things like that? Would you change anything, or would you say, no, how they did it is absolutely spot on?
Well, two things. One, that makes a presumption that I could do better than the writers of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Not falling in that trap, because I'm only writing on their shoulders. I'm only creating on the shoulders of Ira Stephen Bear, Michael Piller, Rick, all of these gentlemen. Number two, really quick, is if Star Trek has taught us anything, is once you mess with the timeline, things go wrong. So no.
We've got a few questions that came in from social media out there. So Jody Pickens says, was there any one part of the story of Sisko that you really wanted to tell?
Oh my gosh. Any one part. I think I really liked telling the idea of not only Ben's story, but his father's story, and his father has to deal, is basically, and the Sisko family is dealing with some trauma that stems back from Earth's dealing with racism and the Sisko's not wanting to leave Earth. And it takes Ben to kind of like break out of that, and I think that was an interesting story to tell, and that was challenging for me, because I was like, well, how am I going to do this in a way that just doesn't beat people over the head?
Yeah,
and entertains them, and explains these characters. And then I found challenging writing the love story between Jennifer and Ben in a meaningful way that we haven't seen on screen, but adding to that and finding ways to add to that, that was kind of challenging as well. So those were really interesting.
Niall McDonald, for some bizarre reason, he wants to ask, do you know what the famous gumbo recipe is?
Yeah, I know, but like Joseph, taking that to my grave. But thanks for asking.
Captain Antifa asks two questions here, actually. One is, what's the best starship and why is it the Defiant? And also, are you doing any book signings in Southern California anytime soon?
Okay, I'll ask the second one first. Nothing in Southern California that I'm aware of. No, I don't have any plans. I will make announcements for any signings that I do. I am doing a convention next week, WinterCon here in New York, and I'll be posting about that shortly. The Defiant, my first love was the Enterprise.
Wait a second, which one at this point now? Because there would have been the original,
no
the
bloody,
movie Enterprise, the D.
Right. No bloody A, B, C, or D. I mean, just the original Enterprise, right? But that being said, the Defiant is a damn fine ship and a tough little ship. And I love the Defiant. The Defiant, I think, in a lot of ways, is better than most starships because it's so small but powerful. It can just bob and weave in and out of things. So I think she's right, yeah.
Our friend Paul O'Connell as well says the following question, which I'm surprised it wasn't on my list of questions. Why is Sisko the greatest Starfleet captain? Actually, do you agree with that statement?
I do agree with that. I agree with that because I think he's balanced. He is a balanced character, a balanced individual, and I think his balance is what gives him it's what makes him the best captain. The other characters, they have certain trauma in their life that Ben has, but he's learned that life work balance better than anybody else.
So Derek, normally we end the podcast with one question, but I'm going to actually ask you four. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm the host and I'm allowed to do that. Three questions in one go, which is going to be, what's your favorite episode of DS9? What's your favorite Sisko scene in DS9? And what's your favorite Sisko quote? And you're not allowed to use this quote.
Woo! Okay. Favorite. Wow. Okay. Favorite Deep Space Nine episode. I think it would probably be in Far Beyond the Stars easily. But then if I had to say like a runner up would probably be I think it's the episode with Dukat and Sisko. Is that Waltz?
Yeah,
or
we're stuck on the planet. Yeah,
or stuck on the planet. That and In the Pale Moonlight. Those two, close second.
Favorite Sisko scene. One scene with Sisko in it.
Woo!
Now I'll give you, while you're thinking, I'll give you mine. And my favorite Sisko scene is one scene that I never feel gets remotely the credit it deserves, which is from the pilot Emissary. And it's that moment when he realizes that he is trapped in one moment in time. And the prophets basically, he keeps saying, why do you keep bringing me back to this moment of Jennifer's death? And they're going, we're not doing this, you're doing this. And it's something that I've often said, that when somebody is experiencing a bad situation in their life, that you can be stuck in one moment of time and you keep dragging yourself back there. And unless you learn to move on, then you're always going to exist there. I think it's brilliant. I think it's so full of depth. And it's just something that I don't think gets the credit deserved. And Avery Brooks's performance in that scene is absolutely top notch. It's incredible. It's an incredible moment, not just in DS9, but in Star Trek as a whole.
Gee, thanks, Joe.
you're there going, ditto, whatever that man said there, I'm taking this.
Oh no, that was great. That was beautifully said. And gee, thanks. That was beautifully said. I think also, I mean, there's just so many, but I tend to go back to Emissary as well. And it's like there's this one scene, which is really, well, these two scenes, which is really one, is bookended, is when he meets Picard. And he's just seething seething with this anger, and it's written so well because there's so much going on between these two actors. And they're playing the words even better than what the words are on the page, you know. And then at the end of that episode, when Sisko says so little, but in the little he says that he's let go, and he's shown that he's let go, and he's saying without saying to the man, you know, I'm sorry, you know, and it's all there in those two scenes. It's all there. The anger and the forgiveness is all there between the two men, and so I think that's a very powerful scene. And is he a favorite quote you said? There's this line, I think in season 6, when they're about to, the Federation Armada is about to engage the Dominion and Cardassian armadas. And he says, there's an old saying, fortune favors the bold. And it's the way he delivers that line, which is phenomenal. I really love it, but this is actually my favorite. The one that George picked is actually my favorite, but I think that is my second one. And then of course there's the Benny Russell line. It's real, you know, you can't pulp and you can't destroy an idea. Yeah. That whole sequence of just acting, you know, when Benny Russell has his collapse in Far Beyond the Stars, it's just a powerful moment of television.
I think one of those things as well about Avery Brooks is when he flashes that smile, and the great thing is he doesn't do it all that much. When he does, it's absolutely magnificent. Like, as you know, there's a genuine warmth behind it as well. Derek, the very last question we have, and it's a question we ask all of our guests, is going to be, what does Star Trek mean to you?
Well, it's like I told you before we started recording. There were 4 things that I think is pivotal in every Star Trek episode, but I have found them pivotal in my life because they were taught to me by my parents, and I try and live them. Is friendship, hope, science, yes, science, and exploration. And Star Trek has always meant the pursuance of all of those things, the acknowledgement and acceptance of all of those things in abundance, and the enjoyment of all of those things. And that's what I try and do in my life. So I think that's why I gravitate so fondly to Star Trek.
Derek, thank you so much. For everybody watching, for everyone listening, Derek's book, The Autobiography of Benjamin Sisko, is out now. I would strongly recommend buying it. I had it read in a very short period of time. It's an absolutely brilliant book. So if you are looking for something to read, especially this holiday season coming up, please do consider it. It's an excellent book to read. Derek, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. I have been your host, Joe Hurley, and we will see you again on another War Room soon. Thanks very much, and live long and prosper.
Thanks for having me.